Thomas Bennett never believed in extraterrestrials. To him, anyone claiming to have seen strange lights in the sky or unidentified flying objects clearly needed psychiatric help. But on the night of September 15th, 1991, while planting corn under the headlights of his tractor on his farm in Kansas, something happened that would make this skeptical farmer question not only his disbelief in extraterrestrial life, but his entire anger toward God. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. The tractor cut through the dark earth as Thomas Bennett worked against time. It was past midnight, but he needed to finish that section before the rain arrived the next day. The headlights illuminated only a few yards ahead, creating a tunnel of yellowish light in the absolute darkness of the Kansas plains. 2 years. 2 years since he buried Sarah, his wife of 24 years of marriage, and along with her, any trace of faith that still remained in his bitter soul. The 5-6-year-old farmer wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his dirt-stained hand. The farm had been drowning in debt since her death, and losing another harvest would mean handing everything over to the bank. Bills piled up on the kitchen table like a cruel reminder of how his life had fallen apart. The overdue mortgage, the tractor payments, the sleeping pills he took every night when he managed to sleep. Since Sarah's death, it was as if a curse had fallen upon the Bennett family property. For years, Sarah had insisted he seek help. Therapy, support groups, anything to deal with the depression that was slowly consuming him. Always the same arguments, always Thomas's stubborn refusal. That last night, she finally gave up trying to convince him. "I'm tired, Thomas. Tired of saying the same thing every day. If you don't want to get better, I can't force you. I'm going to sleep at Karen's tonight." Her voice was different. There was no more anger, just deep sadness and exhaustion. Sarah left the house in silence, without slamming the door, without shouting, just a silent goodbye that Thomas didn't know how to interpret. The accident happened 20 minutes later on the curve of the rural road. Rain had started to fall. The road was slippery, and the car skidded on the curve, crossing into oncoming traffic just as a truck was coming down the hill. Thomas knew the truth. Sarah died tired of trying to save him from himself, tired of watching the man she loved drowning in depression without accepting help. The sound of the tractor engine was hypnotic in the solitude of the night. Thomas had always liked working at night. It was when he could forget, even temporarily, the weight of guilt he carried. But that night, something was different. A strange feeling, as if he were being watched. He stopped the tractor and turned off the engine, listening. Just the wind in the trees near the fence that separated his property from the small woods. Thomas shook his head. He was getting paranoid. 2 years of insomnia and guilt were taking their toll. When he turned the key to restart the tractor, he saw something that made him frown, confused. A light, white, almost bluish, coming from the direction of the woods. "I knew someone was out there," he muttered, turning off the engine again. His first reaction was completely practical. It must be someone with a powerful flashlight. Maybe illegal hunters or teenagers pulling some prank, or perhaps a neighbor looking for lost cattle. Though it would be strange for someone to do that in the middle of the night. But the light was moving strangely, too uniform, too smooth, and it seemed to be floating. Thomas climbed down from the tractor, irritated. Financial problems were bad enough. Now he had to deal with trespassers on his property. He walked a few steps toward the fence, trying to see better in the darkness. That's when the light stopped moving and started approaching. Thomas's heart began beating faster when he realized the light was definitely moving in his direction. It wasn't the irregular movement of someone walking with a flashlight. It was constant, as if gliding through the air. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice coming out more shaky than intended. "This is private property." The light stopped again about 100 yards away. Thomas could see it was larger than he had initially imagined, the size of a basketball, maybe bigger, and it was suspended approximately 6 feet off the ground. His hands began to tremble. It wasn't from fear. Thomas was a countryman, used to storms, wild animals, and trespassers. None of that made him back down. But this was different. A deep uneasiness, almost animal-like, that didn't go through reason. as if his very body knew of a danger that his mind couldn't yet name. But his feet seemed nailed to the ground. The depression of the last 2 years had stolen almost everything from him: his appetite, his sleep, his will to live. But it hadn't stolen his stubbornness. And in that moment, stubbornness was all that kept him standing. "Whoever you are, get off my property," he shouted louder, forcing authority into his voice. "I'm armed." It was a lie. The shotgun was locked in the cabinet at the house nearly half a mile away. Thomas rarely used it, even for hunting. Sarah always said he was too gentle to take the life of any creature, an observation that used to make him smile, but now only increased the pain in his chest. The light began to pulse softly, like slow, deep breathing, and with each pulse, Thomas felt something strange, pressure in his head, as if someone were trying to whisper something in his mind, but in a language he couldn't understand. "No, no, no," he murmured, shaking his head violently. "This isn't happening." The last 2 years had been hell of guilt, insomnia, and medication. He knew he was at his limit. The neighbors whispered that Thomas Bennett had been losing his sanity since his wife's death. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's what this was: a hallucination, a nervous breakdown finally manifesting. It made sense. The financial pressure, the guilt, the loneliness. His brain was creating something impossible to distract him from the real pain. "That's it," he told himself, squeezing his eyes shut. "It's just stress. When I open my eyes, it won't be there anymore." But when he opened his eyes, the light was closer, much closer, and it was no longer alone. 2 other lights had appeared, flanking the first. They formed a perfect triangle in the air, pulsing in sync, as if controlled by a single mind. Thomas's stomach churned. Vomit rose in his throat, but he swallowed hard, refusing to show another sign of weakness. His whole body was shaking now, cold sweat running down his back despite the mild night temperature. "I'm going crazy," he whispered, the words coming out like a desperate prayer. "God, I'm going crazy." It was the first time in 2 years he had mentioned God without cursing him. The lights began to descend slowly, approaching the ground, and with them came a sound, low, almost inaudible. Like a humming he felt more in his bones than in his ears. Thomas took a step back, then another. His instincts screamed for him to run, get on the tractor, and get out of there as fast as possible. But part of him, the part that had carried guilt and self-hatred for 2 years, whispered that maybe he deserved whatever was happening. Maybe this was his punishment for letting Sarah die hating the man he had become. The lights touched the ground, and Thomas Bennett thought his life, or what was left of it, was about to end. What emerged from the lights wasn't what Thomas expected, if he expected anything at all. There was no shiny metallic spacecraft like in the movies. There were no engine sounds or flashing colored lights. The 3 lights simply expanded as if they were bubbles of pure energy, and from within them emerged a figure that made Thomas question whether he was still conscious. The creature, if he could call it that, was approximately the height of a man. But its form seemed made of a substance that glowed softly like condensed moonlight. It had no defined contours. Its edges constantly flickered as if made of water in perpetual motion. Thomas blinked several times, desperate for the image to dissolve, but it remained there, solid, real, impossible. "This isn't happening," he repeated like a mantra, but his voice came out only as a hoarse whisper. "This isn't happening." The creature didn't move toward him immediately. Instead, it seemed to be watching. It was hard to tell since he couldn't make out eyes or a face in the luminous form, but Thomas felt the weight of intense attention focused on him, as if he were being analyzed in a way that went far beyond the physical. His heart raced so violently that he put his hand to his chest, afraid it might explode. His legs shook so much he had to lean against a small tree to keep from falling. Vomit rose again in his throat, and this time he couldn't hold it back. He turned and vomited violently onto the earth he had just plowed. When he straightened up, wiping his mouth with his shirt sleeve, the creature was closer. "No!" Thomas screamed, raising his hands instinctively. "Stay away from me." But his voice didn't come out as a scream. It came out as a desperate moan of pure terror. That's when he heard the voice, not through his ears. The voice emerged directly in his mind, soft but unmistakable, as if someone were whispering inside his skull. Thomas. He recoiled as if he had been punched in the stomach. It wasn't possible. None of this was possible. People didn't hear voices in their heads, not sane people. Don't be afraid. Get out of my head, Thomas screamed, pressing his temples with both hands. Get out of my head. But the voice continued, patient, almost caring. We came because you called. I didn't call anyone. Thomas was hyperventilating now, his chest rising and falling in short, desperate breaths. The creature took another step closer, and with it came a strange sensation. Not exactly warmth, but something like what Thomas felt when Sarah hugged him after a nightmare. A feeling of safety. This terrified him even more. Thomas, your pain calls across dimensions. Your guilt, your anger against the Creator. Stop. Thomas began backing away, stumbling over his own feet. Stop talking in my head. I'm sick. I need a doctor. We are what you fear most and what you need most. The creature extended something that could be an arm toward him. Thomas saw, or imagined he saw, small sparks of golden light dancing around translucent fingers. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to run. Every survival instinct he possessed urged him to flee from that impossible thing and seek help immediately. He was having a nervous breakdown. It was the only logical explanation, but his feet didn't move. And a terrible small part of his mind, the part that carried 2 years of guilt and self-hatred, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he deserved to find out what would happen if he stayed. Thomas, there are things you need to understand about Sarah, about you, about what really happened that night. His dead wife's name coming from that strange voice in his mind was like a physical blow. Thomas doubled over, hands on his knees, struggling to breathe. How do you know her name? He managed to ask between gasping breaths. But deep down, terrified, Thomas already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Thomas ran. It wasn't a conscious decision. His feet simply moved, carrying him toward the tractor while his brain screamed desperate explanations for the impossible thing he had just witnessed. Hallucination. It had to be a hallucination. The sleeping pills he took, combined with extreme stress and lack of sleep. Yes, that made sense. He had read about side effects of antidepressants. Auditory and visual hallucinations were on the list. He climbed onto the tractor with trembling movements, his hands slipping on the key as he tried to start it. The engine coughed, once, twice. Come on, come on, come on, he muttered desperately. On the third try, the engine caught. Thomas didn't even look back. He stepped on the accelerator and headed toward the house, the tractor bouncing violently over the uneven ground. Only when he reached the front yard and turned off the engine did he allow himself to look back. The area where he had been working was completely dark. No strange lights, no impossible creatures. Empty. Hallucination, he said aloud, the word coming out like a prayer of relief. It was just a hallucination, but his hands were still shaking when he opened the front door. For the next 3 hours, Thomas did what any rational man would do. He researched. He turned on the old kitchen computer, a gift Sarah had insisted on buying years ago, and began searching for information about medication-induced hallucinations. The results were both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Yes, the medications he was taking could cause hallucinations, but usually only in cases of overdose or when combined with alcohol. Thomas hadn't had a drink since Sarah's funeral, and he took exactly the prescribed dose. He changed his search. Hallucinations caused by extreme stress. Better people under severe stress could experience temporary psychotic episodes, especially people with a history of depression and trauma. Thomas fit the profile perfectly. That's it, he murmured, closing the computer with a sigh of relief. Stress. I need to see a psychologist first thing tomorrow. He went to the bedroom, took 2 sleeping pills instead of his usual one, and lay down. For a moment, he thought he might be able to sleep normally for the first time in weeks, until he heard the voice again. Thomas. He sat up in bed so fast he felt dizzy. The bedroom was empty, lit only by the digital glow of the clock. 4:23 a. No, he whispered. No. It's the medication. It's just the medication. You can't run from us by going home. Thomas covered his ears with his hands, pressing so hard it hurt. I'm sick, he screamed. This is a hallucination. Sarah didn't want you to blame yourself. His wife's name made him double over as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Tears burned his eyes. The first genuine tears he'd shed since the funeral. "Stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please stop. She forgave you before she even died. You need to know that Sarah is dead." Thomas screamed at the empty room. "She was buried 2 years ago. She can't talk to anyone." Silence. Thomas remained motionless for several minutes, listening only to his own heavy breathing and the ticking of the clock. Slowly, the tension began to leave his muscles. Medication. It was definitely the medication. Tomorrow, he would see a doctor. Changed the prescription. Maybe he needed to be hospitalized for a few days to detox his system. He was almost convinced when he looked out the window. 3 lights hovered over the cornfield, waiting. Thomas yanked the curtain closed and hid under the covers like a frightened child. But even with his eyes closed, even with his ears covered, he could still feel their presence, and the terrible certainty that no matter how much he tried to rationalize, explain, or run away, they wouldn't leave until he stopped running. The problem was that stopping running meant accepting that something was happening that his rational mind simply couldn't process. And Thomas Bennett wasn't ready for that possibility yet. Thomas didn't sleep. He lay there motionless, listening to every sound in the house, the creaking of wood, the humming of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, anything that proved he was still in the real world, the normal world where farmers didn't hear voices in their heads and creatures made of light didn't exist. At 6:00 the morning, when the first rays of sunlight began filtering through the curtains, he finally got up. His legs were weak, as if he had spent the entire night running, but he forced himself to walk to the window. He opened the curtain slowly, prepared to see the empty field, to confirm that everything had been a product of his disturbed mind. The field wasn't empty. Where the 3 lights had hovered the night before, there were 3 perfect circles in the earth, each approximately 15 feet in diameter. The soil inside the circles was completely smooth, compacted, as if something heavy had pressed uniformly over the entire area. But that wasn't what made Thomas grip the windowsill so tightly that his knuckles turned white. It was the corn. Inside each circle, the corn he had planted just a few hours earlier had grown. Not sprouted, grown. The plants were almost 2 feet tall, with green, healthy leaves swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Impossible," he whispered, the word coming out like a moan. Thomas ran outside barefoot, still in his pajamas. Maybe it was the angle from the window. Maybe the sunlight was creating an optical illusion. Maybe. But when he reached the first circle, reality hit him like a concrete wall. The plants were real. He touched the leaves with trembling fingers. They were fresh, wet with dew, definitely alive. The soil around the circles was still loose, freshly plowed, exactly as he had left it. But inside the circles, the earth was smooth, and the plants grew in perfect rows. "No, no, no," he repeated, walking from one circle to another. "This isn't possible. Plants don't grow like this, not in a few hours." He knelt and dug around one of the plants with his bare hands. The roots were there, well developed, as if the plant were months old. But he knew that he had planted those seeds just 8 hours ago. Thomas's stomach churned again, breathing heavily, trying to find a rational explanation. Had some neighbor played a prank on him? Impossible. No one could transplant grown plants to form perfect circles in the middle of the night without making noise. Experimental fertilizer? He hadn't used any special fertilizer. And even if he had, plants don't grow 2 feet in 8 hours. Then he heard sounds behind him. Thomas turned around, still on his knees, expecting to see some neighbor. Any normal person who could help him find a logical explanation for the impossible. It was the light creature. But now, under the morning sunlight, it looked different, less frightening perhaps, still translucent, still strange. But there was something peaceful about its presence. "Do you still think you're crazy?" the voice asked gently in his mind. I. Thomas couldn't form words. His eyes moved from the circles of grown corn to the creature, then back to the grown plants. "The plants are real, Thomas. You can touch them, smell them. Others can see them. This isn't a hallucination." "Then what is it?" Thomas asked, his voice coming out as a desperate whisper. "What are you?" The creature moved closer. Thomas didn't run this time. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because the physical evidence around him had broken his ability to deny what was happening. We are what you would call teachers, guides. We came because it's time. Time for what? Time for you to stop punishing yourself for what wasn't your fault. Time to understand who you really are. And time to understand that Sarah never left you. His wife's name coming from the creature made Thomas tremble. But this time, it wasn't just from fear. It was from something he hadn't felt in 2 years. A small spark of hope. You really knew her. We know all souls, Thomas. And some souls ask us to care for those left behind. Thomas looked again at the corn growing around him. His rational mind still screamed that this was impossible, that he was having a complete break from reality. But the evidence was there, solid, real, impossible to deny. And for the first time in 2 years, Thomas began to consider that maybe, just maybe, there were things in the universe that his limited mind simply couldn't understand. The problem was that accepting this meant accepting that everything he believed about life, death, and his own guilt could be wrong, and that terrified him more than any alien creature. Thomas stood up abruptly, brushing dirt off his knees. "No," he said firmly, more to himself than to the creature. "I won't do this, Thomas." "No," he shouted, backing toward the house. "I don't know what you are or how you did this," he gestured toward the corn circles. "But I'm not going to participate in any fantasy or experiment or whatever this is." The creature remained motionless as Thomas continued backing away. "There are scientific explanations for everything. There always are. And if I can't find them right now, it's because I'm sick. Because I need real medical help. Not," he hesitated, searching for words, "imaginary conversations with things that shouldn't even exist." Thomas turned and ran into the house, slamming the door hard. His hands shook as he turned all the locks, something he had never done during the day. In rural Kansas, nobody locked their doors during the day, but nothing about that day was normal. He went straight to the phone and dialed Dr. Roberts' number, the family doctor. It didn't matter that it was only 7:0 the morning. "Dr. Roberts' office, this is Martha." "Martha, it's Thomas Bennett. I need to speak with the doctor. It's urgent." "Thomas, are you okay? Your voice sounds." "Just put me through to him, please." A few minutes later, Dr. Roberts' familiar calming voice came over the line. "Thomas, what's happening?" "Doctor, I need to be hospitalized. I'm having hallucinations, visual and auditory, things that don't make sense." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of hallucinations, Thomas?" Thomas closed his eyes, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound completely insane. I'm seeing things, hearing voices. I believe it might be a reaction to the medications I'm taking or maybe a nervous breakdown. But I need professional help." "All right. Can you come to the office today? Let's say 10. Yes, I'll be there." Thomas hung up the phone and felt momentary relief. Real help, medical, scientific, someone who could explain what was happening to his brain and how to fix it. He avoided looking out the windows while getting dressed. He showered, made coffee, ate toast, all the normal actions of a normal morning. If he acted normally, maybe he could convince himself that everything would return to normal. At 9:30, he went out to his car. He didn't look toward the field. He didn't think about the grown corn. He focused only on getting in the car and driving to town. But when he turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. He tried again. Nothing. "Come on," he muttered, hitting the steering wheel. Not now. On the third try, the engine coughed once and died completely. Thomas got out of the car and opened the hood. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew the basics. He checked the battery, the cables, the oil. Everything seemed normal. That's when he heard the voice behind him. "The car won't work today, Thomas." He turned slowly. The creature stood a few yards away, its luminous form almost transparent in the sunlight. "Did you sabotage my car?" "We didn't sabotage anything, but some conversations can't be postponed." "I don't want to talk," Thomas shouted, surprising himself with his own vehemence. "I want you to leave me alone. I want to go to the doctor. I want my normal life back." "You didn't have a life, Thomas. You just had existence, survival. There's a difference." "That's a lie." But even as he said it, Thomas knew the creature was right. For the past 2 years, he hadn't lived. He had just breathed, eaten, slept, functioned. Sarah didn't want that for you. Stop mentioning my wife. Thomas slammed his fist on the car hood. The physical pain almost a relief compared to the emotional pain. She's dead. Dead, and you have no right to use her name to manipulate me. We're not manipulating you. We're trying to free you. Free me from what? From the prison you built for yourself, from guilt that doesn't belong to you, from the belief that God abandoned you when in truth you abandoned him. Thomas felt tears burning his eyes. He didn't want to cry in front of this thing. He didn't want to show weakness. I don't believe in God, he said with a choked voice. Not after what happened to Sarah. But God still believes in you. It was too much. Thomas ran back to the house, slamming the door again, locking himself in the bedroom. He grabbed his cell phone and tried to call a taxi, but there was no signal. He tried the landline. Dead. He was trapped. Literally trapped on his own property with creatures that said things he didn't want to hear about a dead wife and a God he refused to believe in. And for the first time since it all began, Thomas Bennett wondered if running away was still an option. Thomas spent the next 4 hours locked in his room, trying every possible way to escape the situation. He tried his cell phone again. No signal. The landline dead. Even the old radio he kept in the drawer was emitting only static. At 2:00 the afternoon, his stomach growled too loudly to ignore. He hadn't eaten anything substantial since the night before. Reluctantly, he left the bedroom and went to the kitchen, keeping the curtains closed. He prepared a simple sandwich, trying to keep his hands busy with normal tasks. But the hunger he felt wasn't just physical. There was a growing emptiness inside him, as if something essential was missing. Thomas. The voice came softer this time, almost like a caring whisper. You can ignore us, but you can't ignore yourself forever. I'm trying to eat in peace, he muttered, but the words came out without conviction. How long has it been since you felt real peace? The question hit him like a punch. Thomas stopped chewing, the sandwich losing its taste in his mouth. 2 years. 2 years since he had felt anything like peace. Sarah used to say, "You carried the weight of the world on your shoulders." She was right. Stop talking about her. Why are you so afraid to remember the good things about Sarah? Thomas dropped the sandwich, his hands trembling slightly. Because it hurts too much. Or because you're afraid to discover that she didn't die because of you. The question cut deep. Thomas stood up from the table so fast the chair almost toppled over. He walked to the window, still avoiding looking outside. We can leave, Thomas. We can leave you alone with your guilt and your pain. But Sarah asked us not to do that. Sarah is dead, he shouted at the closed window. Death is just a transition. Sarah still exists in a form you don't understand, and she suffers watching you destroy yourself over something that wasn't your fault. Thomas pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window. It was my fault. If I hadn't fought with her. Do you want to know what really happened that night? Or would you rather keep living in the distorted version you created to punish yourself? There was something in the voice that made Thomas hesitate. It wasn't pressure or threat. It was sadness, as if the creatures also suffered seeing his pain. We didn't come here to force you into anything, Thomas. We came because a soul you love asked us to. But the choice was always yours. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 2 years of self-condemnation on his shoulders. Part of him wanted to keep running, keep hiding in familiar guilt. It was painful, but it was known. The other part, small, almost inaudible, whispered that maybe it was time to stop running. There are things about that night you don't know. And why would you know about it? Because we were with her. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. The answer didn't make sense, but something about it resonated deeply within him. She didn't die alone, Thomas. And she didn't die because of you. The tears came before he could stop them. 2 silent tears that ran down his face as he still faced the closed curtain. I don't know if I have the courage to listen. It was my fault for never listening to her. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Sarah knew that, and that's why she sent us. Thomas stood still for long minutes, feeling the gentle presence of the creatures on the other side of the wall, patiently waiting for his decision. Finally, he turned and walked to the door. Not because he was forced, not because he had no choice, but because for the first time in 2 years, A small part of him wanted to find out if there was something beyond the pain he carried. Thomas opened the door and walked out to the yard. The three creatures were waiting near the barn, their luminous forms almost ethereal under the afternoon sunlight. He walked slowly toward them, each step a struggle between curiosity and terror. When he got close enough to better distinguish their forms, he stopped. Up close, there was something almost familiar about the creatures. Not their appearance that was still completely alien, but something in the energy they emanated. "Thank you for coming, Thomas. I still think I'm crazy," he said aloud, feeling strange talking to beings that responded directly in his mind. Sanity is relative. There are many realities beyond the one you know. One of the creatures moved closer. Thomas forced himself not to back away. "We want to show you something about the true nature of life and death. About why Sarah left when she did." "Show me how." Instead of answering, the creature extended something that could be a hand. Small, golden sparks danced around the translucent fingers. "Touch our hand, Thomas. We can share a greater understanding." Thomas looked at the extended hand as if it were a venomous snake. Touching that thing would mean completely accepting that all of this was real. "Are you afraid of what you might discover?" "I'm afraid to discover that I really killed my wife," Thomas whispered. "What if you discover that her death was part of a plan you both agreed to before you were even born?" With his hand trembling, Thomas extended his fingers toward the creature. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded in light. Suddenly, he was no longer in his farm's yard. He was somewhere among the stars, floating in space, but breathing normally. Around him, thousands of golden lights moved like a cosmic dance. "Each light you see is a soul," the voice explained. "Each one planned their journey on Earth before incarnating, including you." I planned my life? "You planned the lessons you needed to learn, the people you would meet, the challenges that would make you grow. Sarah was part of that plan just as you were part of hers." One of the lights approached, pulsing brighter than the others. Without knowing how, Thomas immediately knew it was her. "Sarah came to Earth to learn about unconditional love through marriage. You came to learn about faith through loss. You chose to find each other because each had exactly what the other needed to evolve." "But why did she have to leave so early?" "Because her lesson was complete. 24 years married to you was the time she needed to develop the ability to love without conditions. Her journey on Earth ended at the perfect moment." Thomas felt as if he had been struck by lightning. "And I agreed to this?" "You agreed to go through loss because your soul knew that only through deep pain would you break the barriers that prevent you from accessing your true spiritual nature. You came here to awaken abilities that only emerge when we are forced to go beyond the rational mind." The vision began to change. Thomas saw himself before birth as a golden light, talking with the light that was Sarah. "I'll leave first." He heard Sarah's voice echoing across dimensions. "And when I leave, you'll feel lost. But it's in that loss that you'll truly find yourself." "It's going to be very painful," his own voice replied. "I'll blame you. I'll blame God. I'll want to die too, I know. But it's exactly that pain that will break down the walls you built around your heart. And when those walls fall, you'll discover that you can heal people, that you can connect with other dimensions, that you can be a channel of transformation for others who have also lost faith. You chose to be a healer through your own healing," the creature explained as the vision faded. "Sarah chose to be the catalyst. Your fight that night didn't cause her death. It was simply the moment you both had chosen for her to return home." Thomas was crying now, but the tears were different. Not from guilt or despair, but from a deep and overwhelming understanding. "So, we all choose our lives, our pain. You choose the experiences that will make you grow the most. They're not always the easiest or most pleasant, but they're always the most transformative. And God doesn't punish. God doesn't judge. God simply allows each soul to evolve at its own pace through the experiences it chooses for itself. You were never abandoned by God, Thomas. You simply forgot that you are part of Him." Sarah's light pulsed brighter and Thomas felt a wave of pure love. Not romantic, but something much deeper. Soul-to-soul love, and something more. Gratitude. She's grateful that you fulfilled your part of the agreement. the creature translated. For the way you loved her, for how losing her transformed you. Now she needs you to use that transformation to help others. Thomas looked at the creatures, feeling as if he had awakened from a 2-year dream. The guilt was dissolving. But in its place arose a greater responsibility. If this is true, if I really chose this, then what's my purpose now? That's the right question, Thomas, and the answer will surprise you. In the days following the encounter at the barn, Thomas expected his life to return to normal, but normal seemed to have completely lost its meaning. The first change was subtle, almost imperceptible. The constant pain in his shoulders and back, which he'd carried for 2 years, began to gradually diminish. It didn't disappear overnight, but each morning he woke feeling a little less heavy. Stranger still, he began to have an inexplicable curiosity about subjects that had never interested him. On Wednesday, when he went to town to buy supplies, he stopped at the small public library, something he hadn't done in years. His feet led him directly to a section he'd never visited: spirituality and philosophy. "Can I help you, Thomas?" asked Alice, the librarian, surprised to see him. I'm not sure what I'm looking for," he admitted, feeling ridiculous. "Something about life after death, maybe." Alice smiled gently and guided him to some shelves. Thomas left with 3 books. At home, he opened the first book with skepticism, expecting to find the ideas absurd. Instead, he found himself reading until 3:00 inches the morning, completely absorbed. The stories of reincarnation, of souls returning to learn specific lessons, of contracts made before birth, all of it resonated deeply with something inside him. "This is exactly what those creatures showed me," he thought, a chill running down his spine. Over the following week, Thomas devoured all 3 books. Then he returned to the library for more. Alice stopped commenting on his unusual choices, just smiled, and set aside new titles she thought he'd like. With the reading came deeper changes. Thomas began paying attention to things he'd always ignored. The way Mrs. Higgins walked when she was worried about something. How the neighbor's son played alone when he felt lonely. The subtle expressions that revealed more than words. One afternoon, while working in the field, he had the strange feeling that someone needed help. It wasn't a dramatic vision, just a growing sense of urgency that made him stop the tractor and look around. He saw smoke coming from the Tanaka's house 2 miles away. He drove there quickly and found Mr. Tanaka trying to put out a small fire in the kitchen. Together they managed to control the flames before they spread. "How did you know?" Tanaka asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I saw the smoke," Thomas said. Because he didn't know how to explain that he had simply felt something was wrong before he even saw a sign of smoke. But incidents like this began happening more frequently. They weren't dramatic visions or supernatural revelations, just a heightened intuition that led him to the right places at the right time. What disturbed him most wasn't these strange sensations, but what was happening to his emotions. Thomas had always been a man of intense feelings, deep anger, cutting pain, but slowly, all those emotions were softening. The anger he felt toward God had completely disappeared. The pain of losing Sarah still existed, but it was different, less desperate, more melancholic. It was comforting, but also unsettling. He felt more at peace than he'd ever felt, but sometimes wondered if he was still really himself. One night, 3 weeks after the encounter with the creatures, Thomas was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead when he heard the familiar voice in his mind. "How are you feeling?" Confused, he answered honestly. "It's like I'm becoming another person, a calmer version of myself, but different. You're removing layers of illusion you've accumulated throughout your life. What's emerging is who you really are. What if I liked who I was before better, even with all the pain and despair?" Thomas closed the book and reflected. The pain had been horrible, but it was intense, real, alive. This new serenity sometimes made him feel like he was floating above his own life, watching it from a distance. "The awakening process isn't comfortable, Thomas. You're between 2 versions of yourself, the old one that's dying and the new one that hasn't been completely born yet. How long will this last? That depends on you, on how much you're willing to let go." That night, Thomas dreamed of Sarah for the first time since her death. But in the dream, she seemed different, more luminous, younger, but also distant. "Thomas," she said, "you're on the right path, but it's just the beginning. There are bigger changes coming. What changes? Sarah smiled. But there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. You'll discover that being a healer comes with responsibilities you don't understand yet, and not everyone will be happy with what you're becoming. When he woke up, Thomas got up and looked out the window. The field was quiet, but he could feel a familiar presence. The creatures were still around, watching, waiting, and for the first time since it all began, Thomas wondered if the transformation he was going through was really a choice. 6 months later, Thomas Bennett was a completely different man from the bitter farmer who had encountered light creatures in his cornfield. His farm prospered inexplicably. The harvests were more abundant, the cattle healthier, and the debts that had tormented him for 2 years had been paid off through opportunities that appeared like magic. An unexpected contract here, a buyer offering above market prices there. But it wasn't the material prosperity that fascinated him most. It was what was happening to the people around him. The transformation began subtly. Neighbors facing crisis began seeking him out for conversations, not to ask for direct advice, but just to talk. And invariably, after these conversations, their situations improved, relationships were repaired, financial problems resolved, illnesses got better. Thomas knew it wasn't coincidence, and this filled him with a deep satisfaction he had never experienced. During his extensive reading about energy healing and spirituality, he had learned about facilitators, people who simply by being present catalyzed positive changes in others' lives. Apparently, he had become one of them. And the feeling was extraordinary. One Thursday afternoon, as Thomas organized some new books he had bought, his personal library now included more than 50 titles on metaphysics, reincarnation, and spiritual healing. He heard a knock at the door. It was Emily Carter, a neighbor he knew only by sight. She was crying, trembling, visibly desperate. Thomas, I don't know why I came here. My husband hit me again last night, and I just knew I needed to talk to you. Thomas invited her in, offered tea, and simply listened. Emily talked for 2 hours about years of abuse, about how trapped she felt, about her fear of leaving her husband because of the children. Thomas didn't give advice. He didn't preach sermons. He just listened with the complete presence he had developed over the past months, feeling a gentle energy flowing through him. When Emily left, she seemed different, more upright, more determined, with a light in her eyes that hadn't been there when she arrived. 3 days later, Thomas learned that she had left her husband and moved with the children to her mother's house. A week later, she got a job she had never considered before. Within a month, she was completely rebuilding her life. The joy Thomas felt seeing Emily's transformation was indescribable. It was as if each person he helped healed a little more of his own wounds. Similar cases began to multiply. Mike Stevens stopped drinking after a 15-minute conversation at the post office. Nancy Wu finally found the courage to have the surgery she'd been postponing for years. Young Tommy Tanaka, who had been skipping school and getting into trouble, suddenly decided to dedicate himself to his studies, all after seemingly casual interactions with Thomas. Each transformation he witnessed brought a sense of purpose he had never experienced as a simple farmer. "How are you feeling about these changes?" the familiar voice asked one night as Thomas read on the porch. "Fulfilled," he answered without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I should be doing." "And how do you feel about who you've become?" Thomas considered the question. "It's funny. For 2 years, I thought Sarah had been taken from me. Now I understand that she fulfilled her part of an agreement we made together and gave me the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to discover my true self." "Don't you miss the man you were before? The bitter lost man? The farmer who lived only to pay bills and survive?" Thomas laughed softly. "No, that man existed, but he wasn't really alive. And now you feel alive. More alive than I ever imagined possible. Each person who finds peace through our conversation, each problem that gets resolved, each life that changes, it's like I'm fulfilling something I always knew I should do, but never knew what. There's more coming, Thomas, much more." Thomas felt a wave of anticipation, not fear. More what? There are others like you, scattered around the world. People who have gone through similar transformations and emerged with the same ability to facilitate healing in others. You're part of something bigger, a network. Exactly. Humanity is going through a gradual awakening. Not everyone at the same time, not everyone in the same way, but many are beginning to question the old limited ways of thinking and living. You are the gentle facilitators of this transition. Thomas leaned forward, interested. And what would my role be in this? There's a meeting happening in 3 days, a gathering of others like you. There you'll fully understand the magnitude of what's happening on Earth and how your personal journey connects to humanity's collective evolution. Meeting where? You'll know when the time comes. And Thomas, yes, Sarah is very proud of how you honored your agreement. She can feel your joy from here, and it completes her in a way you don't fully understand yet. The mention of Sarah brought a wave of deep gratitude, not pain. Thomas looked at the field, where it all began. The corn that had magically grown that first night was still there, taller and healthier than the rest of the crop, constant proof that miracles were possible, and that his life had become one of them. For the first time in years, Thomas Bennett could hardly wait to discover what the future held, because now he knew that no matter what came, he was exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he was born to do. And the best part was knowing that Sarah would be watching every step of this extraordinary journey with love and pride. Thomas's story shows us something profound. Sometimes the greatest transformations in our lives come through the most painful experiences. How many times have you gone through difficult situations and asked yourself, why is this happening to me? Maybe, just like Thomas discovered, these experiences aren't punishments, but opportunities to awaken to who you really are. Maybe you too have abilities and purposes you haven't discovered yet, healing capacities, ways to help others, to make a difference in the world in ways you can't even imagine. If Thomas's journey touched your heart, if you've experienced losses that seemed senseless, or if you feel there's something greater waiting for you, leave a comment sharing your experience. You'd be surprised how many people have gone through similar transformations after major challenges. And if you believe there are greater forces working for our evolution, whether through unexplainable encounters, intuitions we can't explain, or simply the feeling that we're part of something much bigger, then you'll love the next stories I have to share. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you don't miss more accounts like this, because just like Thomas discovered, sometimes the answers we're looking for come in ways we never expected. And who knows, maybe your own transformation story will be the next one I tell here. Until next time, and remember, you might be much closer to your true purpose than you imagine.